comes to my mind over and over and over again during this conversation. It's where the Army catchphrase, the branding logo, "Be all you can be," came from, and that, of course, is Esalen.
Yep.
What?
And this is all Esalen. What you've just been describing, the cross currents of the human potential movement, Maslow's psychology, the work of Harriman. Ken Wilber was running to Esalen.
Yep.
Everybody was going to soak in the hot springs and hang out naked with, maverick theologians and nuclear physicists and futurists, and they're all there, and they're, in many respects, they're the ones who kind of gave us this synthesis. I look at Esalen as kind of the externalization of what Wilber is teaching, and of course Wilber and I think Michael Murphy were I think it was Michael Murphy. They were best buds, or not necessarily best buds, but good friends. And so Wilber would run to Esalen to go and spend time in that environment, because Esalen was living out the integral theory.
They were doing diplomacy with the Soviet Union.
Oh, big time. In fact, I have a section in my book on that. It's fascinating because really Esalen's teachings and his thought process was already playing into the worldview of Mikhail Gorbachev. Yep. And concepts of perestroika and glasnost were emerging as kind of parallels to what was being discussed at Esalen. And I documented in my book about how at one point Gorbachev is more or less confronted or asked the question, was the big house at Esalen bugged? And Gorbachev just gave the universal signal.
Yep.
Yes, right. It was. Yes, it was. We are listening, because Esalen would have seminars, you'd bring in all these speakers and have these working sessions, and all of a sudden 2 weeks later, the same language is coming out of Moscow. And of course, Esalen being, and you're absolutely right, Courtney, it was that bridge between East and West. It was a diplomatic, even I would suggest maybe espionage back channel. Yep. Between Moscow and Washington, D.C. So when Yeltsin came and had his North American, his American tour, I think Brookings and Rockefeller and a few other of the major foreign policy institutes wanted to have the rights to chauffeur him around and to host Yeltsin, but it was Esalen that got it, and primarily through the work of Jim Garrison. Who I met Jim Garrison's sisters, by the way. Jim Garrison grew up in a Baptist missionary household, and then tossed his faith for this integral spirituality, this re-enchanted sense of spirituality. So when I think about Wilber and what we've all been describing is it's a synthesis. Wilber is bringing all this into a synthesis. He's synthesizing Eastern mysticism. He synthesizes Western development thought, human development. Yeah, exactly. Systems theory comes into the synthesis. Jungian psychology in a big way, comes into the synthesis. You have this synthesis. And then I see the synthesis now that we've, entered the digital age, we are layering that in completely.
Mm-hmm. I think the picture starts to emerge where it does become totalizing, and I think that's the part that I think really needs to sink in, is that this isn't just a top-down vision; it's also a bottom-up vision, and it has promises for elites, not just in terms of their incentives in terms of the power structure, but Esalen was like an orgy factory essentially, right? Like it was a more accessible version of Epstein Island, perhaps not quite as degenerate in the same criminal ways, but that was in the New Age world. That's how I knew it. Like Esalen was synonymous with hot tub. That's those two words go together.
Questioning hot tub diplomacy. It is on CIA.gov. You can pull off the document and read it for yourself. This isn't just like, interpretation or theory. Like,
right.
The document.
Right. You're 100% right, Courtney. It's not. This is not conspiracy. This is what happened.
Yeah.
This is literally what happened. Hot tub diplomacy was a real thing, which is where we get the sense of track two diplomacy. Yeah, Esalen gave us track two. Totally gave us track two diplomacy. In fact, crazy. When I was at the NATO forum just in Dayton a couple of weeks ago, one of the working sessions was on the cultural side to diplomacy, which was track two diplomacy.
Sure.
Track two is
build
sort
net.
of like,
Yeah. So track two diplomacy is so track one diplomacy is, let's call it hard politics. Ambassador to ambassador, foreign minister talking to prime minister, talking to president. It is your government institutions working with counter government institutions back and forth. Track one is the hard game of diplomacy. Track two diplomacy is the cultural, religious, artistic expression of looking to find new relationships, new diplomatic relationships, new expressions of policy, and how that might look by blending and breaking down barriers, cultural barriers. So art plays a really important role. Developing networks of artists across borders. So if all of a sudden, let's say, we've got a war in Ukraine, well, the people behind the line, so to speak, well, there may be some now interactions, artist to artist, performer to performer, cultural person to cultural person. And so it was recognized that track two diplomacy is a game changer, because it's not about the rules, it's about building the relationships. And it's in the relationship that you can begin to now affect change at a far deeper level, and even far faster, because you'll have a constituency that is outside the norm of government. I'll give you a good example. When I was at the G8, G20 World Religion Summit in 2010, the World Religion Summit, it paralleled the G8 meetings, and now we have the G8 Interfaith Forum, and the G7 Interfaith Forum does the same thing. So you had world religious leaders all coming together. While the G8 was meeting that year in 2010 in Toronto, the G8 Religious Summit was happening in Winnipeg, my capital city. And here you had in Winnipeg all of these religious leaders. You had Muslims, you had Christians from like a pile of different denominations. The Christians made up the bulk of it. You had Sikhs, you had pagans. Tony Blair Faith Foundation was there. They're all there. Jim Wallace from Sojourners is there. World Vision is there. They're all there. And they're all now talking one to another about policy and giving suggestions, policy suggestions that they have worked through collectively over the week. And then that was all delivered into the hands of the political leaders at the G8 meeting in Toronto. At one point in the event, it was obvious that they realized the importance of what they were doing, because they were saying to the effect of prime ministers and presidents come and go. We as faith leaders, we stay sometimes for decades.
Yeah.
And whereas governments operate within the realm of their boundaries, our faith traditions and our faith communities sometimes expand far beyond a single nation, encompassing entire continents or entire globe, regions, or the globe in terms of, let's say, the Anglican Communion or the Roman Catholic Church. And all of a sudden, it was like a light bulb went off for some of them. And there was a point in time when it was all of a sudden evident that they have more long-term political power and the power to change and transform civilization than the heads of state, because they can do it relationally through a bottoms-up network, and they are not going to disappear when the next round of federal elections happen.
I think as I listen to all this, I hope that the audience is hearing just how widespread this is. I think sometimes it's easy for people to think that these ideas are fringe, that these ideas, are, and in some sense they are, but meaning people don't have everyday experience with these ideas. It's very rare. Maybe you'll go to a yoga class, or maybe you'll listen to Oprah and she'll have Eckhart Tolle on or something like that, right? Or maybe you'll have someone who does their horoscope. That's about the most that people encounter, the shores of these ideas. But we started out the conversation talking about the Dark Enlightenment, Game B, Peter Thiel, the Weinstein brothers, right? You're talking about some of the most influential people. You're talking about faith leaders. We talked about Gorbachev, right? We're talking about, like, these are some of the most influential people on the entire planet. Like, there's no, at least that the public knows of. Like, these are publicly recognizable names. I'm sure there are more influential people that no one really knows about. But in terms of the names that show up in the headlines, this ideology, this worldview, this political view, this seductive set of practices, this tempting set of treats, all of this, it defines many of the halls of power. Certainly not all of them, but many of them in a way that is very much emerging. And so, because Courtney, you started out talking about Game B, right? And this is a new thing that's coming along. You have this evolution of political engagement. Used to be, between diplomats and formal settings, and now you have a more person-to-person, intimate setting. You have a much more networked kind of view. And so we're living through this shift of the way that the business used to be done, right, to the way that business is coming to be done by a set of elites that are going to impose a set of values on everybody based on their interpersonal relationships, that's designed to evolve us through technological coercion. And that seems like that's how real this is. This is not a made-up thing. Maybe it's conspiracy theory in the sense that, like, yeah, it is a grand conspiracy, but it's not conspiracy theory in the sense that it's a lie or it's a myth. All these things are very real, and people believe this stuff. They're not just making it up. It's very serious. And just to land it back where we started, there are major high-level influencers on X that have massive platforms built on propagating these ideas undercover. They're not necessarily they will state it in the open, but they're not necessarily always doing so. And so I guess, as people, how can people recognize these ideas if they're not being stated in the open for what they are? What sort of actions can Christians and perhaps even non-Christians take to push back on these ideas, either in their lives, in their homes, in their communities, even politically? Because we're looking at something that has many heads, that hides under the surface, that pops up a little bit over here, a little bit over there, but continues moving forward with a persistent momentum. What can we do as individuals to push back on that, to identify it, push back on it, and call it what it is?
I love that. I love the question. So one of the things we can do is, first of all, we have to take responsibility to engage ourselves within this worldview battle. We can't sit back and wait for somebody else to take the reins. We have a tendency, and I've seen this even within the realm of the conservative push against globalization, saying, hey, if we could just, bring all of our little organizations, our little groups together, we could create this great, big, powerful block. And we're like, hold on, you are now going to be part of the same problem. You're going to do this exact same thing. How about we, and it's, not everything that the left, if we want to say use the term the global left, not everything that they're doing is intrinsically wrong. Networking isn't wrong,
right?
It's not what they're doing. Is they're just upping the game at a level that the average person doesn't engage in. So one of the things we can do, network.
Yeah.
We can build our own networks, and this show is part of building that network. We build our own network. We take responsibility in our own households and in our own lives to know what is true, to know what is false, to be able to recognize those distinctions. We have to be able to have those kinds of conversations with our pastors, with our family, and in terms of the politics. If you're called to engage at politics at the local level, that's where the rubber hits the road, is at the local level. Always. It hits the local level. You probably can't change your state government's direction. I can't change the direction of my provincial politics, but I can certainly influence people around.